what does it mean to free your mind? What does it mean to decolonize one's mind? Today we talk about how we think, how we consume, how we create, and the knowledge we are seeking to live a better, more flourishing life. On Mama, we made it with DJ. Good morning, man. What's happening? How are you?
My brother, all is well. How you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm a little frazzled today. Today is one of those mornings where I woke up to 1,000 things on my mind, and ranging from the mundane, I got to get up and take the garbage out, to the sublime. My wife just celebrated her birthday. Both my boys are home for the summer, and it is fun for the four of us to be here. And yet, watching them adult is stressful, man, because I can't block and, get in the way of obstacles for them the way I once did. And so watching them, go through their paces has got a lot on my mind right now. So I woke up this morning trying to get centered and trying to find a certain level of calm amidst a chaotic, noisy mind. So that's where I am.
If I may ask, do you find there are specific spaces, entry points that you find yourself wanting to engage?
With them?
Yeah.
I am blessed to have the two sons I have. They're amazing young men, amazing men. And they're very similar and very different at the same time. Mm-hmm. And there's 7 years between the two of them. So, with my oldest, it is honoring the fact that I am much more a consultant and an advisor at higher than I am, a director. Like, I don't get to tell no more. It's more around answering his questions. And so the entry point is, fortunately, at his initiation more times than not, and what he wants to talk about, and that he is in a phase of his life where he trusts me enough to share things with me that are sensitive, is a blessing. So it's much more, initiated by him, and then we talk about a lot of common interests. With my youngest, it is last lap of college, and so senior year is upon us. Senior year of college soccer is upon us, and so for him, it's much more trying to be an extra pair of eyes as he gets ready for all that senior year will bring to him, and helping him be willing to unpack some of the things that he might not yet have figured out. And quite frankly, man, it's daunting to think about the world we're living in, walking into it off of a college campus. So, trying to, give perspective and advice and counsel where I can. So both entry points, I think, are theirs generated. My younger is much more me still trying to look around corners with and for him.
Yeah, that's deep, man. I obviously don't have kids, but everything you said about your sons, man, I can see it. I mean, I was fortunate enough to be introduced to them at a really young age for them. And two incredible young men. And what you said is interesting about similarities, common threads, but then very different when I think about the two of them at the same time. And then I think about you, and I would say the same thing when I throw you into the mix.
Yeah.
So, that's very interesting, man.
And you know what it is right now? I was listening to something earlier this morning about the value of mentorship. And we are definitely always the season for this, but even more so now. This is the season of aunts and uncles, man, right? This is the season of extended family reaching in and connecting so that they've got multiple sounding boards, multiple journeys for the road that they're about to embark upon, multiple voices that don't sound like mine, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. And they don't always know that they need mentorship. We all go through a phase where we get to that age where you can't tell us nothing, and we know that we know that we know. And I'm not saying that that's where they are, but, this is the season for advice and counsel and really good extended relationships. And it's not always easy to figure out how to find that in your life. So I'm watching them also try to navigate who else they trust beyond me and Talisa, right? So trying to figure that out. So it's interesting. It's interesting to watch.
Yeah, speaking, I'm gonna get your take on something. Speaking of aunts and uncles, it reminded me of a story when you said that. Did you have to read, or were you asked to read any Mark Twain? Okay,
Yeah, Huck Finn, Tom Sawyer for
Huff
sure.
and Tom Sawyer, Adventures
And
of
then
Tom Sawyer.
separately, I read a lot of Mark Twain on my own because the narrative fiction didn't really do it for me. But the satirist and political commentary I found much more interesting as I dug into his catalog. So, there's that. But yes, I
Man,
did.
we have such a different take on it, man. I remember being asked. I never read those books.
Lucky you.
Yeah. So someone recently asked me. There was this white cat who I worked with in the past, and he asked me what was your favorite Mark Twain book, and I said every one that I haven't read. And it's like he was offended, like because it was such a. I'm like, man, I could never relate, and it got me to thinking, man, and maybe we could spend some time today talking a little bit about the ways in which we are born into colonization, right? North America's version of colonization.
Yep. Yep.
And I want to get your take because when I think about that as a kid, man, what relevance did that really have? Like, if I have to fight to find the relevance as a kid to something like that, those stories, those narratives that become mandatory reading.
Sure.
And then we know what's omitted from mandatory reading, and I'll share some things that, right? So I'm curious, man, was it something you felt like there are certain aspects of this I can relate to because I have a curious mind, etc.? Or was it, I got to read this and I'm going to make the best of it?
Let's do this. Welcome, everybody, to Mama We Made It with DJ and Reg. We're just going to pick up right there.
There are other people here.
That's DJ. I'm Reg. Behind the scenes is Nakia and Marina, our phenomenal advice and counsel and production crew. And today we want to talk about, at Nakia's prompting, quite frankly, how DJ and I independently and maybe collectively work on decolonizing our mind and how we figure out content and the things that we consume and how it forms our worldview. So welcome to the show. To answer your question, the jumping frog of Calabasas County or whatever it was called back in the day, Mark Twain stories. My parents were educators, right? So let's just start there. My parents were educators, my dad particularly in history. And my father had a saying that he said all of our lives, take 2 sets of notes, one to get an A and one to get away, right? And over time, it meant different things. And sometimes it meant, do all you can to get, instruction that they're going to test you on while being clear on all the things that they're not teaching you. Sometimes it is do the best you can to get out of a class that you're not going to get an A in and just get through it. So it always varied. But I always was paying attention to the standard narrative and the historical context of what I knew to be true relative to our people's journey. And at a young age, I, being a baby of 5, was exposed to some revolutionary stuff. My older brother who was a Panther and very much a 60s kid. So there was a lot of stuff going on. So I've always had a sense of, for lack of a better word, these niggas in school are lying to you, right? And it has always informed what I read and has given me a healthy skepticism of what's in front of me. Mm-hmm. And so school for me was always an obligation to press the teacher on, hey, that doesn't make sense to me, make it make sense, right? And invariably, there'd be a phone call home, Mr. Hamlet, he's talking too much in class because he's pushing back on the narrative. To which, my parents will hold the line. And so for me, it's early on. For me, it was early on understanding of there's a story that the victor tells. There's a story that, the people that, lost get told. And then there's the truth of how humans interact with each other, And that's in, dot by dot by dot. I'll say this, and then we'll go back and forth on this. The biggest reason why I love history is because there is a power in reading the contemporary narrative. If you can go back in time and find stories of what the people were saying real time in the 1600s, the 1700s, the 1800s, all the way to the present, they always tell on themselves. They always tell on themselves, right? Both in terms of why we do the things we do and all the isms, right? Racism, sexism, patriarchy. They tell on themselves historically, and watching people now lie and try to rewrite the record is an obvious tell of they know what this is on paper. So history for me is always the exercise and pursuit of that one article, that one story, that one oral, kind of history that was captured on ground. Why the slave narratives are so important, right? It's why a lot of the early writings going back to ancient civilizations are so important, is to try to get to the contemporary explanation of what's happening. So I'm fascinated by that. And even to today's time, I'd say that what I read, how I read, particularly how I read white authors, is always with a healthy dose of, I know they're lying, I just got to find the line.
Yeah, that's really insightful. And I think, subconsciously, and at times consciously, especially now that I've gotten into being on the education side of things, as an educator, curriculum developer, I've had to take that lens. And, when I think about this concept of decolonization, there are three things that come to mind for me, and I'm curious to see if you had to create a structure for it or a framework for what is decolonization, what is it? The three things that really resonate with me, one is this concept of just being exploited as a black person in North America, whether that's culturally rich, physically at times, and then mentally. I think the other thing is a constant attempt to subdue our consciousness, how we look at the world, how we define things, what's important to us, what we're aware of. And then the last one, I think, is deprioritizing our ability to have some self-determination. Are we thriving or are we surviving? And then it gets into this concept of flourishing that we talk a fair amount about, and then the ability to self-actualize. I thought about it quickly through these kind of phases of my life. And at what point in my life did these concepts become conscious to me? So when I think about my childhood, I go, and that's that, developing skills to avoid being exploited. Two quick stories, and one has to do with financial sustenance. So my grandmother, my mom's mom, Alice was her name. She had this ability, man, to create, utilize, and distribute resources like I've never seen. She made her money. She showed up for work. I never heard her talk a lot about money unless we were asking for something crazy. And she would always go to the credit union. And I called her Gamma, G-A-M-M. I'm like, Gamma, you burning a hole in the street going to the credit union back and forth. It's not that much going on. She said, every time they see my money, I want them to see my face. And I never forgot about that. She wanted them to attach that money to her face and realize how important she was, right? And not that it's just about money, but at the credit union, that's basically what the conversation is. Sure. And then number two, and then I'd like to kind of get some insights into other aspects of your childhood, any stories that resonate. Number two was this thing around not being objectified as a young black kid. Mm-hmm. And I have a story about my mom that, man, it's literally read like I'm sitting in class. So I'm in fourth grade. I'm in East Lansing, Michigan. There are two black kids in class. The girl's name is Monet. Real cool. Had a crush on Monet. She had a crush on me, but nobody was trying to holler at that point. We're in fourth grade. Monet and I are sitting in class, and the window's open, and a big yellow jacket flies into the classroom. Monet and I are sitting next to each other next to the window. She jumps. The white kids are kind of sitting, looking, and crouching back. I'm doing the same. The teacher, I never forget her name, it was Miss Mayer, shoos the bee out and says, it never ceases to amaze me. The black kids always seem to have a really, really visceral reaction when there's a bee or a bug in the room. And it didn't sit well with me. Nobody said anything. Sure. I went home and told my mom. My mom got off work early, came up to the school. She said, I want you to be a part of this conversation, and lit that lady up. Those were my sort of entry points into this developing skills around not being exploited. So I'm going to pause there because there's some things in adulthood that address the other two. Sure. But I'm wondering, man, when you start to conceptualize decolonization and think about it as far as your journey, man, what resonates with you?
So much. I'll say two things. One is the history of public schools in the United States, certainly, is a history of black folks in America. Mm-hmm. Right? Public schools start on the East Coast. The Puritans and Quakers build some public school programs. Mm-hmm. But fundamentally, public schools get their teeth, dealing with the children of freed slaves and what we're going to do here. But fundamentally, public school is built to create conformity, docility, following orders, structure, or whatnot. If you can't stay in a public school, then we send you to a reform school. And that's how you get reform schools, and you get the Native American or Indian schools and all the things they're trying to beat Indian culture out of them. And so that the key driver of a colonized mind is the public school system, mm-hmm. where the majority of our kids are. So going in, that's the thing. And so for me, to answer your question, it has been a journey of the things that I've read, man. Like, I remember my mom giving me Nikki Giovanni Young and falling in love with poetry. And I remember that turning into James Baldwin, and then reading, probably going through junior high school, a variety of just black authors, probably mostly male authors, right? And then you get to high school and you get into this love with the 60s, and it's the black arts movement, and you're reading, Mary Baraka and, Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, Leroy Jones, and all that. And then you're reading Sonia Sanchez and more Nikki Giovanni, and you're recognizing the struggle of black power growing, but you're also hearing sisters talk about, like, we trying to get black folks free, but us and these brothers ain't on the same page either, because these brothers got us in the back of the room. So you're working through that in high school, and then you read Malcolm X, and it lights a light in me like no other. And then I graduated and I'll never forget, right? I remember being in Des Moines, Iowa in high school, still having, like, my first girlfriend was a white girl. My second high school girlfriend was a sister. And I remember going to college like, I'm putting that narcotic down. And I get to college, man, and I'm taking black studies courses, Dr. Harry Reid, I'll never forget his classes, and just learned a ton around movement and the Panthers and us. But I got introduced to this book by a sister named Paula Giddings called When and Where I Enter. And it was kind of the portal that then took me through into becoming a big Toni Morrison fan and getting into Maya Angelou in a different way, and really starting to understand feminism and feminist, thinking through the lens of sisters and, Miss John, I can never say the word, but the intersectionality of it all. And so I remember coming out of that class seeing sisters in a different lens. And then I remember going to the East Coast after college and getting in much more radical thinking, right? And it was Frances Cress Welsing and ISIS papers and Tony Browder and, success strategies for Africans in America. And I started defining myself as an African in America, right? I'd never called myself African American, never dug it. I've always called myself black, but I thought of myself in a Pan-Africanist way, right? And so I became a Garvey disciple. And so I go through these chapters, man. And I remember in the 90s doing a lot of esoteric reading, Gnosticism, Stoicism, ancient Egyptian mystery systems. And I got lost, man. I never forget calling my sister Stephanie, talking to her about my faith has gotten shaken. I'm nervous about what I'm reading. I got to let go of what I've learned to handle these new ideas. What do I do with it? And she gave me some really good perspective on God has given us a spirit of curiosity, and you're just working with that. There's no problem with that. And that gave me some peace. And then I remember reading more scholarly stuff and putting down a lot of the street corner stuff, right? Like, it felt good, but the science and the math and the teachings weren't strong. So then you get to shake out the Diop, and you get to John Henry Clark, and you start to get into these self-taught, serious thinkers, man. And it's been a journey all along the way. And so my answer to your question is really around consciously, consistently pushing myself to read, and read some more.
Yep.
And the more questions I got, the more rabbit holes I'd fall into, and the more I would pull the footnotes out and figure out what was that. And invariably, it led me to this river of Black thinking going back to the very beginning of time, right? Yes, there's a lot of oral tradition in our lineage, but there's also a robust body of work across the African diaspora. And I've just been enamored with it all my life, and it has been life-giving. And as I get older, I realize not everybody's had that blessing. Like the stuff that I know, I take for granted that everybody's been reading the same book.
That's right.
I take for granted that everybody knows this stuff. And increasingly when I talk to folks, they're like, nah, I don't know that. Like, I read Race for Profit, Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor, a phenomenal author and intellect. And it's just a breakdown of the intersection of racism in real estate and the unholy alliance between the federal government, real estate agents, and the people that do inspections, all from like the 40s post-war through the 70s, right? And the crystallization of that book is about how the molecule of racism in America is Black women. Mm-hmm. If we can target Black women who are, by policy more than anything else, single women, and then we can exploit their need for housing, we can exploit their need for daycare to work and raise their kids, we can make a lot of money putting them in substandard housing, using basically fraud to give, we lost the word I'm looking for, but to do all the inspections of a house to declare it ready for sale when we know we're taking over these tenement houses, like all that stuff, man. So that reading has been a gift from my parents and from my village, and it has been the thing that has liberated me. And I look at my sons, and they don't read like that. Through no fault of their own, they don't read like that. And as much as we talk in our house, and we talk about this all the time, they know it. But the book sources of it all being obscured by time and by intentionality, and that's a big concern for me. But for me, the liberation has been in the reading, for sure.
Yeah, and that road to consciousness has changed significantly. Yeah, reading and we've talked about it in a prior episode, just how we consume content today as young Black folks. It's changed significantly, and I'm not sure it'll ever really go back. It's interesting you talk about authors. When I got into curriculum development at the university level and teaching, I felt it was incumbent on me to not operate in what I consider decolonization as I'm creating curriculum. There are things that I just know. There are things that I've learned. There are things I can prove, etc. But how did that find its way into curriculum that I'm developing and teaching to master students? And this is a science degree.
Sure.
So that journey was incredible for me. And one author who, I would love for the audience to learn more about, her name is Dr. Grada Kilomba. And she lives in Lisbon. She's a PhD in psychology, focuses on trauma today, but incredible sister of African descent. She starts every lecture with a set of questions, and I'll just share those questions. And it's amazing when we juxtapose this against this BS around, Mark Twain and all that kind of stuff. So, question she asked: what was the Berlin Conference of 1884-85?
Ooh,
Right,
get into it. Let's
right,
get into it.
right.
Yeah.
What was it?
The
And
partitioning of Africa.
a partitioning of Africa.
Sorry, I'm interrupting.
No, well, let's see if you can answer all these, dear.
Okay,
You know what? This might be a good little, right? And then the production of the General Act of Berlin by Bismarck, right? All that kind of stuff. Which African countries were colonized by Germany, right? Critically important. Tanzania, Rwanda, etc. How many years did German colonization over the continent of Africa last? Who was Queen Nzinga? Who wrote Black Skin, White Masks?
Yeah.
Frantz
Fanon.
Frantz Fanon. Who was May Ayin? But then she asked more general questions around what is knowledge and what knowledge is being acknowledged as such. Mm-hmm. Who makes that determination? What's not knowledge? Moreover, who can teach it? So if I asked a question, just a quick quiz, Purse, what percentage of scholars, I'll say professors in the United States, are Black?
What percentage of professors in the United States are Black, given that the population of Black folks in the United States is around 13, 14%? I'm going to go 1%.
A little better. 7%. Still not impressive, right? According to the National Center for Education Statistics. So the number's around 7%. So you start to think about, okay, no shade at all against the folks that are in my craft, but how many of those are actually really good? Yep. Right? You got to start doing those percentages as well, right? Sure. And conscious the way we're talking about. So the journey is tough, man. And this whole thing is critical when we think about not just teaching existing education, but when we have the ability to create it. Yeah. Focusing on breaking down the colonization and all of that framework that causes us to think and create the way that we do. It's a constant journey. It is. It's a constant journey. So I know we're pressing up on time, but...
we're going to ignore the clock today. Keep it rolling.
Okay, so I'll just repeat her name. It's, again, Dr. Grada Kilomba, Grada Kilomba. The book is Plantation Memories. And then there's some really critical excerpts coming out of there. But some of the concepts that she touches on is just, neutral locations versus white spaces. Yep. And how do we create more neutral spaces? Yep. Oftentimes, I'm paraphrasing, but oftentimes when we lead a conversation that includes science and our insights, it gets reduced to being subjective and not objective, right? Even though it's still factual and has some interpretation to it.
There's a lot of Sheikh Anta Diop discussion around melanin and what it means and the science of it, and going to conferences and getting into huge database, scientific inquiry-based arguments with the academy. And it's fascinating to watch how we get discounted in those conversations. Yeah, discounted, consistently discounted. Yep. And then how, at times whiteness is at the center of a conversation, especially around science, et cetera. And we tend to operate at the periphery or the margins, right? Yeah. And how do we shift that conceptually? So, and I want to say there, if I can, real quick, Du Bois is important, right? Du Bois is important. Like separate from Du Bois and Booker T and that whole conversation at the turn of the 20th century, Du Bois as a social scientist, doing ethnography work, doing data visualization before it was a thing, very, very innovative. And while we know him for, Souls of Black Folks and Talented Tenth Conversation, what we really know him for is his writing on Reconstruction, We Should, and his ultimately becoming a Pan-Africanist, being a key part of kind of Ghanaian foundation with Nkrumah. And so there's a lot of study in that space that is worth unpacking as well, to your point around, the excellence and the scientific method and the data that comes with it as we create new content and new knowledge and ways of learning, that we can learn a lot by studying Du Bois' journey in that path, as well as part of the decolonization is a really honest critique of capitalism.
100%.
Right. We must get into these conversations of, systems of governance, not to be confused with ways of making money, so that we don't confuse democracy and capitalism because we're comparing it with Russia and their variations of socialism and communism. It's a fascinating thing that we just don't study enough anymore. Like, I remember coming up, man, and the Africans I met at State, cool friends who were sisters from Liberia, a couple of brothers from Nigeria. And what I remember then is how much the Africans all studied economics growing up. Like as a given, just like as a fundamental, the way we talk about basketball, them cats would be talking about deep esoteric economic theory. And I'm like, what are y'all talking about? What do y'all read? And so in that vein, how about that? I'm curious, what do you read? Like separate from your scholarly work, or maybe to include your scholarly work, what do you read on any given week to keep you sane and relatively clear thinking and clear seeing, given the world that we're in that is trying to be distorted by a variety of forces?
It's a really interesting question. What I read primarily, as you just acknowledged, comes from Google Scholar. So I'm heavy into Google Scholar. I'll pick a subject on a daily basis first and just go really deep on it. I tend to look at number of citations, how often was it cited, and by whom. When it was written, the follow-up research, has someone added a moderator or a mediator that lets us know more about a particular subject. But it's typically coming out of Google Scholar, man. From management conferences, psychology conferences. I think the bigger point, though, is, man, I write a lot. So I take that information and I will produce a thesis based on what I've read. I may not ever submit it or enter it. I have done that and proud to be nominated at conferences to share that with an audience. But I treat it that way. If I find something really intriguing or 5 pieces really intriguing, I start to write a thesis against that as if I'm going to submit it for an upcoming conference. And it's a practice that I think subconsciously has combated this whole concept of colonization, because it allows me to put my voice in it. It allows me to put the science that I've learned in it, the research that I've brought to this world of sports leadership in a really unique way. So for me, it's not just consuming. I force myself to create as well first. Well, again, whether I submitted to a conference or not. The last time I submitted to a conference and spoke was 2 years ago. It's almost 2 years ago now.
Okay.
And that was in Chicago. Prior to that, it was in Italy. But that's the path I take, man. I do read a lot, but I also write.
For the audience, give them a little bit more of a primer on Google Scholar, how it works, and how universally accessible or not it may be. Sure.
The beauty of it is it's still a heck of a research tool for Research One institutions. So my doctoral work was Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, and Google Scholar was my best friend. You basically, go into Google Scholar. It's a website, and you punch a subject in, or an author, habitus, flourishing, whatever it might be. And all of the articles of relevance will show up. And most of the time, there's a PDF version available to you there. So the citations are there if you want to do a strong reference back. Sometimes it's articles and excerpts from books, but most often it's really deep research papers. And you can even put that filter in based on what you're looking for. So it was my main source of lit reviews, etc., as I was creating my paper.
Is it free, or do you have to be a part of the academy to accept it?
It's free. Yeah, it's free. Again, that's the beauty of it, man. It's free. Unless something's changed. I graduated in 2018 with my doctorate, and I don't think that's changed. I'm still in there now. Okay. So, yeah, heck of a tool. And it changes the conversation when you're talking about research, to your point, versus perspectives. Sure. Not that perspectives aren't great.
Sure.
But if you want to ground something in research, man, that's a great way to go.
That's free game. That's free game. You want to leave? I mean, beyond that beautiful free game, you want to leave the people with anything as we wrap here?
You know, here's what I would say, man. It's in some ways the world is closing in on us, and I don't want to seem morbid here, but the clock is ticking, and we have to always remain conscious. We have to be aware, but I say most of all, continue to have conversations like you and I do, man, on a weekly basis. And we've always done this, man. We've been doing this since, what, 80?
At least drinking MGD in the park after hooping back in 90, baby. At least
brother, this is what we've done, man, since the late 80s, right? Yeah. I mean, and it's critically important. And what you said, man, I don't think there's anyone that I know or will ever know, even in a scholarly space, that is as well read as you. But what I appreciate about you is that you don't mitigate someone else's perspective simply on that. You're always listening, you're always learning, and finding a way to bring those insights in. But there's no one as well read as you are. And I think that's a skill, somewhat of an art as well, to make people still be heard and feel heard, man, in that space.
I appreciate it, and I'll just close by saying I'll never forget. My oldest came home from college, and we had gotten into something as we are this close, and so we disagree on 0.5% of things in the world, and we argue about this shit like it's World War III. But he came home one time, and he told me, he's like, you know what, Dad, I'm learning not to, and he was talking about being in a women's studies class, and he's like, what I learned in that class is how much space I take up in a conversation. And it arrested me because I take up a lot of space in conversations. And it's an Achilles heel for me, and I'm working really hard at being aware of it. So I'm trying my best while I got a lot to say to humble myself to be really good at listening and being really good at sharing the microphone. So this exercise that we are doing is part of that. But I appreciate your words, man. So I would simply say to the people, man, I love these conversations. There is nobody I love doing this more with than you in terms of how we chop it up. I hope that everybody is doing the things that it takes to free your mind and be really judicious in what you consume and be curious about the world. Because I do believe no matter how morbid and bleak shit might seem right now, we will be here forever and ever and ever and ever.
Say that.
Peace and blessings, everybody.
See you soon.
Mama, baby.